So these are my older calves. There's 25 in this group, and then we've got the younger ones in the next field down. I've got 19 in there. These are now about 8 months old. Some of them may be 7 months old. The smaller gang back there, they're about 7 months, 6.5 months old. As you can see, I'm all doing really well at the moment. They recently got moved into this bigger field once the grass grew, so they've got 11 acres here, and next door they've got 8 acres. At the moment they're getting about £5 each a day of beef rearer nuts. They were a bit mucky because we've had awful weather the last couple of weeks, but we have needed it obviously for the rain. There's Malibu. I always like to take them off ad lib about 2 weeks before we turn them out for the summer and autumn. Just get them used to clearing up their corn in one go, whereas obviously with ad lib they can pick and choose. I normally do this by only giving them a couple of buckets between them, rather than giving them the full. These have 6 buckets, because they won't clear it up in one go, and then if it rains obviously it will ruin the corn. This calf here is called Snaky Pete. He was actually bitten in between his front legs there by an adder a few weeks ago. We'd actually seen the adder 2 days before he was bitten under a piece of galvanised in the calf field down the bottom. Huge adder. I went in to feed them one morning, and Snaky Pete, as we call him, had the biggest abscess hanging from the skin that goes from between the front legs and up to the neck that I've ever seen. So after speaking to the vet, doing a bit of research, I numbed it, opened it up to release the pus out of it, and we've got about half a bucket of pus out. Kept him inside for about 5 days while he had a course of penicillin, just to make sure that all the infection cleared up. After 5 days he came back out, and thankfully he's had no lasting damage at all. I mean, it can be fatal for calves, cows, sheep, depending on where they're actually bitten. He was bitten on the loose skin there, so luckily there was no sort of major blood vessels that could carry anything around the body. As I've said in previous videos, this winter I actually had a 100% survival rate, didn't lose any calves at all. We only had one calf that went down with, 1 or 2 that went down with pneumonia, and that was before we'd actually had a chance to vaccinate them, which shows how important vaccinations actually are, because after they was all vaccinated we never had any pneumonia again after that. Something else I actually had 2 cases of this year was diphtheria, something I've never dealt with before, so I wasn't sure exactly what it was. And there's Dippy with the little horns there, and the reason why she has got little horns is because she got diphtheria, so we didn't want to dehorn her. The symptoms of this was she had a very watery mouth, didn't want to eat and drink, was obviously in some pain and discomfort and quite depressed. After a 3-day course of pen and strep, the abscesses in her mouth actually burst, and she was able to sort of clean her mouth herself by drinking water, and she healed up and recovered really quickly. We then had one of the calves in the bottom pen, he's called Gordon, actually get diphtheria as well. This can be caused by a little cut in the mouth, and some bacteria gets in and causes it. But the watery mouth was the main symptom of this. And something else which I think I have talked about in previous videos, Helen the bull calf, which is a bit of a joke. When we first got him, he was so loud that he reminded us of a friend of ours called Helen, who talks a lot, and there he is, Helen the bull calf, so he became Helen. What happened to Helen is an extremely rare side effect from dehorning. Speaking with the vet, obviously, they think that his skull was probably slightly thinner than normal, So even though he was numbed and everything before he was dehorned, the heat from the burner actually caused his brain to heat up. He was absolutely fine after dehorning, and then 3 days later we found him in severe distress. He was actually throwing himself up the walls of the shed. He'd thrown himself out of his pen. He was in obvious severe pain. He couldn't see properly. He was trying to stumble around in circles. It was actually quite a traumatic thing to see. So we didn't know at the time actually what had happened, so we pulled him, well, we had to sort of half drag him next door into a spare stable for his safety, because he was throwing himself almost like he was trying to run away from the pain in his head. So that night I gave him Metacam to help with the pain and some antibiotics, because we weren't sure exactly what had happened. Then after consulting with our farm vet, we all came to the same conclusion, that it was this very rare side effect from the burner in the dehorner. Now, we only use it for a couple of seconds each bud and it's done. My partner has dehorned hundreds, if not thousands, of calves over his sort of life of being a farmer, and he's never had it happen before. This vet hadn't actually seen a case of it before either, but had read about it in textbooks, and it does happen. Helen, for a few days, was actually blind and couldn't see. He would just walk round his stable that he was in circles, wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink. We carried on with the antibiotics and the painkillers. We had a rug on him, you know, well bedded up, just anything to try and keep him comfortable. We kept the stable fairly dark, just so it wouldn't sort of hurt his eyes and his head. The top of his head also was quite swollen. There was no infection in the actual horn buds, so it wasn't an where the horn buds were, sorry. So it wasn't an infection. This was purely because his skull is slightly thinner, which is a similar thing that can happen with goats, actually. And it just heated up those parts of the brain. After 5 days, me and my partner basically decided that it wasn't fair on him. He didn't seem to be recovering very well, and we decided that we were actually going to have him put to sleep. Then the next morning I went in and he was actually stood up and drank half a bucket of milk. Sort of as if he was telling me, you know, I want to fight. So I thought, right, well, if you're going to start eating and drinking and you're showing improvement, then I won't give up on you if you don't give up. And here he is 6 months later, absolutely fine. He's got slightly droopy ears, which seems to be maybe a slight bit of paralysis maybe there in the nerves. But apart from that, it hasn't affected his growth at all. He's perfectly fit, well and healthy. His eyesight is absolutely perfect. Loves his food. It did take about a month, maybe 6 weeks, for him to fully recover from the trauma. He was very scared of me for a few weeks, because obviously I'm the horrible person that was sticking needles in him every day, and, you know, having to hold him down while we sort of jabbed him and did things like that to him. But now he's back to being me best friend again. Very sweet calf. Loves fuss and attention. Saying apart from his droopy ears, he's absolutely fine. The rest of them, we've actually had quite a sort of illness-free winter. Say we've had the odd one that have had a little bit of a temperature, and we always treat that very quickly, because obviously I test their temperatures very frequently, because I just like to keep on top of anything so they don't go downhill so quickly. And their temperatures, everything I write down in what I call my calf book. How much milk they have, how much food they're eating a day, anything I'm a little bit concerned about will all go in my book, so I can check what their normal sort of body temperature is. With calves, a normal body temperature is around 102 degrees, and that is about normal. I will normally treat a calf with antibiotics depending on what symptoms they have. Anyone that's got a temperature of about 103 and up. I will always put, because I rear in the winter as well, if a calf's got a temperature, I'll always put a calf rug on. I have one proper one, and I also made a few of my own, which work really well. Just so they're not using their energy to keep themselves warm. They can use their energy to fight the infections off. So, yep, this is, I say, the big calves, as I call them. Now they'll all go off and go and graze for the rest of the day. I say they're not looking their best at the moment because the weather has been, and you see they're all a bit muddy, has been very bad the last couple of weeks, but they mould enough now that they can stick it. If they was any younger, then I would have brought them back inside, which we have actually done in a previous year. They'd only been out about 2 weeks and it didn't stop raining. They were not happy, so we actually brought them all back into the shed and they stayed in for a week, which they were extremely happy about, and then we turned them back out once the weather had improved. These are what we call the smaller calves. This calf here is a bit of a joke, is actually called Vegan. She was actually allergic to something in the milk replacer. It did take us a week to figure out what was happening. She was fine when we first bought her from market. She was about 4 weeks old, 5 weeks old. No, probably nearer to 4 weeks. And after a few days, she'd start blowing up after her milk. And in the previous day, she'd seemed very sort of depressed. She'd drink her milk and then she'd go and lie down in her pen and wouldn't sort of jump about like the other calves did. Once she started blowing up, we thought we'll take her off milk for a couple of days and just give her water to see if that helped, and it did. So we thought we'll put her back on the milk. Exactly the same thing happened. She'd blow up like a balloon. So we actually weaned her early and she's not looked back. She's not the biggest calf, but she is doing well. She's fit, healthy, happy, growing. I don't think she'll ever be the biggest heifer in the world, but I do think if we'd kept her on the milk replacer much longer, she probably would have died from it. There's Pug Dog, one of our Charlies. We've got some red limos in here, Simmentals and Charlies, and these are all doing really well. They're a happy little group. We have got a Simmental at the back called Honey Bun, or Bunches, who's actually got a fracture in his foot, which we have been treating, so he's a little bit lame, but he's a lot better than he was. And all of these again fit well and healthy, happy little group together, so I'm sure they'll all grow into big heifer and steers. Bullocks, this is Ivan, who actually nearly broke my hand when he was a calf. So this is the 45 all together, all happy out and grazing.